everything is fake and nobody can think. And these two things actually link together very well, completely, basically. Everything is fake in the sense that, you go to the supermarket and you want to get some nice produce, only to realize that it's been sprayed with pesticides. You think you're getting something nice and healthy, maybe some satsumas, or, you want to go and get a banana, only to realize it's a starch banana. It's not even a real banana. But normal bananas, they actually have seeds in, and you go to the supermarket and you're getting nothing real, basically. You're getting something completely fake. You are getting information from the media. You think you're getting some real information, whether it's the mainstream media, whether it's the alternative media, whether you're looking at information from the BBC, or whether you're looking at it from X. It's also Operation Mockingbird, etc., which we have no reason to assume that ever ceased to continue. So you're eating things that you think are real, but they're actually not. You're listening to information in the media that you think is real, but is actually not. You think you've got some new alternative media on X, but then they're getting deep state funding. Maybe they're getting funding from Dogecoin. Maybe then you go outside and look, stay with me, right? But maybe you go outside and you look at the weather and you think, this weather looks interesting. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, are those regular cloud patterns? And then you maybe do a bit of research, right? And you think, okay, we've been doing weather manipulation since the 50s. Whether it's storm control or cloud seeding or solar geoengineering or HARP. And you may be looking to how that connects to 5G towers, and you're starting to realize that you're living in a simulated reality and everything is fake. And this is a bit of a problem because we're not actually fake entities. We are real. We're human, right? We can interact with one another. When I speak with you, or when you speak with me, or when you speak with your friend, you're having a real conversation most of the time. I mean, a lot of the time these days, you'll be speaking with fake people and they've got fake intentions and they're not there to actually have genuine conversations. They're not thinking. Right, which we'll come into in the second part. But we're real, right? We're not actually in a simulation, right? We're not supposed to be in a simulation because we're real. And, I was listening to David Icke's podcast with Liam Tufts, and he says that, we live in a simulation, and his simulation theory is a little bit different to mine, where he says that, we are perceiving a small amount of what is actually there in, the perceivable universe. We can only see a certain amount of it, which is probably true. But we are real. When I rub my fingers together, I can actually feel it. If you hit me in the face, I can actually feel it. When I speak with someone, they are flesh, they are human, and they have a heart, and they have a mind, and they are real. So we are real beings living in a fake simulation that is designed to keep us in this kind of perpetual state of, non-think, and also keeping us ill and reliant on things like Big Pharma. And that brings me to Big Pharma, because Big Pharma, and not only that, but many other things, as I say, whether it's the food industry or anything else. I mean, just go back to the food industry for a moment. I mean, you go into a supermarket and I see people's orders all the time, obviously, and when I see people ordering things, maybe they've got produce, and wherever the produce is sprayed, okay, cool. And then they've got Pringles, say, for example. Okay, that's not even real. They're literally completely manufactured. Maybe you have like Kipling's Angel Cakes, which is just pure and utter shit. Maybe you're eating Hovis bread, and bread should be 3 ingredients. How many ingredients is in Hovis? Many. Just preservative after preservative after preservative. It's all made artificially. It's all artificially made. The medicine is the inverse of what it should be. A complete and utter inversion of how we treat and how we deal with diseases these days compared to what it was before the Rockefellers got involved. It's an inversion. And why did they do that? People talk about money, and I think money is part of it because money is control. I would also say that it's about, obviously, depopulation, keeping people sick and dependent on the state. And people really believe in the scientific religion these days. Orthodox science, standard science, regulated science, which, and with regard to medicine, comes from the Rockefellers. What did the Rockefellers do with medicine? And this information is all available on the internet. I'm not going to hash through the whole thing for you here. But effectively is that they monopolized it, and they said, well, you're going to learn what we teach you about it. Even if it's right or wrong, doesn't matter. You're going to learn what we say. And if you start teaching natural remedies, if you continue teaching natural remedies, natural being the key, because nature is the giver of all life, then you're going to lose your license, or maybe you'll end up in jail. And nobody's going to take you seriously. We'll use our mockingbirds in the media to discredit you. And so you've got fake food, and you've got fake information, and you've got fake weather and a fake environment, and you've got fake medicine, inverted medicine, and this is the world that you live in. This is the simulated reality. You're a real human, you're real flesh, and everything around you is totally and utter fake. But no one questions whether everything is fake. No one observes the simulation for what it actually is, and no one takes the time to really think about why things are the way they are. When people start dying out of nowhere who have taken the vaccine, very few people will think, why is that? Even if it's an athlete, for example, to just have a heart attack or they'll just collapse. Why is it that the NHS is so overloaded with people? Is it because of a mismanagement of funds? Or maybe it's just underfunded. NHS is struggling, underfunded, because we don't think. And this is not an accident. This is by design. We don't think because we've been programmed not to think. The same people that inverted medicine and inverted the food are the same people that inverted the mind. Because the mind is a thinking tool. You think, you understand, you process information, and when you're a critical thinker, you maybe oppose the information or the prescription or the narrative that is being fed your way. And you say, hang on a minute, that doesn't really make sense. But if you're a worker, and if you're just a slave, and if you haven't got the ability to think, and if during your childhood you were never thinking, you were just memorizing, then you're going to turn out to be a worker and not a thinker, and someone unintelligent, and someone who's unable to engage in critical thought. Again, done by design. 1903, General Education Board brought in by the Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller. And what did that do? What that did is that it ensured when they made their simulation that nobody would look at it and nobody would think about it. Like when Axel Rudabakana went into a Taylor Swift event and stabbed 3 girls, and people on the internet started talking about how it's a Muslim asylum seeker, nobody thought that that's a little bit on the nose. And they went out and they started rioting. When the synagogue attack happened recently in this country, everybody just thought, well, yeah, Muslims. They just thought Muslims bad because that's what they've been programmed to think by the Mockingbird media, and they don't have the ability to question that narrative, and they don't think about maybe diving into it a bit further, becoming curious, and looking at the fact that maybe the BBC reported on the story early, and also they withdrew the police presence. They might not connect the establishment of the CIA and the establishment of other federal agencies in America with things like the Operation Mockingbird and controlling the media, and therefore what they're hearing in the media as something that they are only hearing because it's what they want them to hear. Because we don't think, and we don't think because it's all by design. It's genius. I mean, think about it. If you're a global cult and you wish to enslave humanity perpetually and almost permanently, then you need to keep it so that no one actually thinks, and therefore no one resists, and no one has communication, and they keep complying. Another good example of not thinking is digital ID. I think that there's 2 mainstream responses to digital ID. One is, it won't happen. 2 is, okay, if it does happen, it will be fine. And, I believe them what they say about illegal migration. And if you were to think about it for a moment, you might connect it to AI, you might connect it to Peter Thiel, you might connect it to Tony Blair, Larry Ellison, Tony Blair Institute, and then you might do a bit of research into the reconstruction of Palestine and what's going to happen with that. And if you do those things, you're going to realize that not only is it real, but it's also bad. And it's something that the lunatic billionaires who have dominated society for generations want for the masses. And therefore, if you think about that for long enough, you come to the realization that it isn't good. So thinking is actually an extremely powerful tool. And that's why I think that we have such a disconnect between people in the world, right? You have conspiracy theorists, and if you think about the term conspiracy theorist, you might do a bit of research and come to the realization that it was mainstreamed by the CIA around the time of the JFK assassination, because people were questioning it. And they were written off as crazy conspiracy theorists, the ones who were thinking. The ones who were thinking were questioning it, and they were written off as conspiracy theorists. And so that's why there's a huge disconnect. And I'll go back to the podcast that David Icke did with Liam Tufts, which was a great show, by the way, a great podcast. And credit to Liam Tufts for doing it, because, you know, David Icke's ideas certainly aren't mainstream, and they're certainly out there and not regular. But David Icke is a perfect example of an individual who thinks. And when he thinks more. And then he becomes more curious, and he's sincere, and he wants to do the research. He wants to understand. Rather than maybe running into this information and saying, well, that's a bit weird, but whatever. For him, it's like, that's a bit weird. What does that mean? That's the difference between a conspiracy theorist, someone who is beginning their enlightenment phase or is enlightened, to the rest of the cattle, the goy cattle. They think, what does this mean? Are there any dots I can connect here? Why is it like this? What could that point to? What does that mean for the future? And I think that this is also connected to potentially an IQ thing, because I do think that IQ as an average has been decreasing. And the other day I was on Hugh Anthony's show, and we were talking about, you know, at one point we were talking about the African concept of time, which is that they don't think about the future. And then you could point to the fact that Africans, as an average, have a lower IQ. And so basically it's like this inability to think about the future. To think about the future. And so people, especially older people in this country, I would say, even in our generation, but in all generations in this country, but you might even say more, sort of people who are aged 30 to 50 or 30 to 60, they're not thinking about the future. And especially if they have kids, they aren't thinking about 15 years from now or 20 years from now, because 15 years from now and 20 years from now will happen. Whether or not they're dead or alive, they have kids, and their kids most likely will be alive, and they will be living 20 years from now. But they're only thinking about the next day or the next week, at best the next month. And in a radical turn of events, maybe the next year. But they're not thinking about the next decade and after that. They're not thinking about it because they've been programmed not to think. Everything is fake and nobody thinks. Nobody thinks about the fact that everything is fake, because a world of thinkers realizes the tyranny, understands the future and the implications of what's happening for the future, and has the ability to connect dots, right? Digital ID, AI, surveillance, problem, reaction, solution, terror, you know, causing people to be divided. People ask about solutions, and you have to look at what they did to get us into this situation in the first place. How did they make it so everyone was retarded? Well, they stopped you from thinking, they removed the information, and they made you unhealthy. Nobody can think. People say all the time, they say, you know, most of the population are a write-off. That's what they say. They say 80% of people will never understand the issue. And I'm not disagreeing with that. But that's because they don't think. So you kind of have to train people back into being able to think again, if that's even possible. And they get information from whether it's the mainstream media or the alternative media or social media. But all of those channels are controlled. Now, you might have the occasional person that breaks through who isn't controlled opposition. Some people say that about Nick Fuentes. But because people don't think, they will assume that Tucker Carlson, for example, is an organic voice. But he clearly isn't, when you just think about it for a moment. Because his dad ran Voice of America for the CIA. Another good, and he was on the ground in Nicaragua. He worked for Fox News. He applied for the CIA. Tucker Carlson did. You know, Fox News owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch close with Dick Carlson, Tucker Carlson's dad. Anyway, Andrew Tate is a perfect example also. unbelievably, Andrew Tate came into the mainstream. Somebody whose dad was in the CIA, and not only that, but he was a translator, right? So he was intelligence in the Central Intelligence Agency between countries. So he was a very important part of the CIA. He was a genius. Yeah, he had a photographic memory. His son, Andrew Tate, bursts onto the mainstream after pimping. And people started taking his advice on money. Hello? Perfect example of people not thinking. He has money, but he hasn't got a clue about how to make money because he cheated his way to get there by pimping. And everybody just lapped it up. And he's the one telling people about the Matrix. And everyone's going, oh my God, this guy's so cool, Matrix. No. He was a plant, obviously. And people say, well, why did they throw him in jail? Why did they throw Tommy Robinson in jail? You'd probably assume Tommy Robinson is a plant. He's an Israeli asset. The idea is to make him seem like most hated by the state, but in reality, they're being taken care of. And those three things, I believe, are how you reverse the damage done, because that's what got us here in the first place. That's what the Rockefellers did. They made us unhealthy by changing the pharmaceutical industry. And then the CIA dominated the the media space, and the food is poison.